Y'all know what it is. Hey everybody, happy 2023 and welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. This year is hitting the ground running with social media expert and owner of Social Hire, Tony Restell. Tony is a multiple-time founder and entrepreneur who, after selling his previous startup, pivoted from selling ads to companies recruiting fresh talent to helping those same companies find social media marketing success. With an eye for largely professional service organizations selling B2B and B2C, Social Hire helps reduce the noise, risk, and trepidation commonly associated with social media marketing and turns it into a viable business development tool. Tony joins us today all the way from the UK for an exciting conversation about the effectiveness of social media marketing and how to ensure success, or more importantly, avoid costly failure, how to diagnose issues with your current social media efforts and when to enlist the help of a professional, how to get quick wins from whatever audience you may already have, and so much more. Please join us in kicking off our collective best year ever with special guest, Tony Restell. Tony, how are you?
I'm very well indeed, thanks. Thank you ever so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're calling in from the UK supposedly, right? So that's what time is it there right now?
So it is 5:30 in the evening.
Oh, well, thank you for making time in the evening for us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. So, Tony, can we just, start at the beginning and tell us a little bit about what you do and, how you got to what you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah. So I run a social media agency called Social Hire. We're focused on working with B2B small businesses. So typically companies that are, looking to sell into other business organizations. Clients will be, consulting firms, recruitment businesses, training companies, technology companies, anyone that has an identifiable business audience that they want to tap into. Before that, I built and sold an internet business, so I've been in the online space in one guise or another since 2000. Where did that time go?
I know, right?
No, I love that though. Well, a big portion of our audience are entrepreneurs, but startup founders, CEOs, people like that. And so I think that social media is one of those things that sort of all these years later, like still kind of continues to elude. And as you're one of the first episodes of ours that will air in 2023, I think it's really important that we maybe sort of set the rules or maybe talk about what is social media marketing in 2023.
Well, it's really interesting that so many small businesses that we talk to and entrepreneurs still haven't really got to grips with it. It's a real minority that we talk to that have got to the point where they can really say each quarter, this is what social media has done for our business. So there's this widespread feeling that, yes, we need to be doing social media, but most businesses still haven't cracked, how is this actually contributing to our business and our bottom line each quarter? And for me, whatever new fads there are, whatever new platforms there are, whatever changes to happen to Twitter over the coming year, actually the fundamental thing is, why is it worth our time investing in this? And what do we need to do for this to actually produce a return for the business? That's always my focus with social media.
So can I ask you, other than clicks and vanity metrics, how can you determine that? How can you figure out what the return is other than, I got 1,000 likes or 500 likes on this post, and yeah, that feels good, and 500 people saw your brand, whatever it is, but that doesn't equate to the bottom dollar. So how can you actually figure that out and what the return is for a client? Do you have like a starting point and then you track it and you can tell, hey, we generated an additional $40,000 of revenue for your business? How does it work?
Great question. It's really interesting. If you speak to people who've had posts go really viral on any of the platforms, and
I have an experience of that I'll share here in a second. So
it's usually the case that results in very little business, because going viral gets you in front of a ton of people. But do they actually have an interest in buying whatever it is your business sells? And because the virality of that post gets you in front of all sorts of different people, it's quite rare that really is transformative for a business. Obviously, there's some social media usage where you're just going so globally, massive that it could take a business that isn't known to one that is. But the two things that I would highlight, depending on whether you're B2B or B2C, in our space of B2B, what we're looking to do for businesses is help them get to the point where, each quarter they can look at, here's all the sales calls that we've had, or here's all the people who have attended our business breakfast, or here's all the people who've requested a demo of what our technology platform does. And you can go through that and you can identify which of those originated from what you did on social media. And
Okay.
so at the end of a year, you're not looking back and saying, oh, we've had this many more likes this year than last year, or this many more people have read our blogs. But you're actually saying, no, of the however many 100 sales meetings we had this year, this portion of them came through social media. And obviously over time you can then track that back to sales as well, depending how many months it is for you to make a sale once you've had a meeting. So that's how it would work from a B2B perspective. If you're in B2C, so you're trying to sell to the mass consumer market, very often that'll be done through advertising and advertising funnels. And at that point, it's very trackable. You spend X $1,000s on ads in a week or a month, and you track that through to how many sales did that produce for the business. And that's either, obviously produced a positive return or it hasn't. So those are the kinds of social media activities that I think really make a lot of sense, because you can clearly see, the return that the business is getting, versus what a lot of small businesses do, which is just feel like we've got to be on social media because it's what everyone, where everyone is.
Yeah. I think it's hilarious. There's credit unions and stuff in the area that they make their employees do these TikTok dances and they do all this other stuff. And I just feel bad for the employees, because the last thing you want to do is actually just, okay, it's Monday, it's here, we got to do a social post and let's think of something funny. Oh, I'll do this dance, or I'll do this or that. And that to me just seems like a complete waste of time. It actually, as a consumer, I see that and I'm like, what are they doing? It's just a turnoff for me personally. And to speak of the viral post thing that you just talked about, I actually have a client that I work for, and I manage their TikTok and Facebook and all that other stuff just to help out with stuff. And we had a post go viral on TikTok, and it got over 2.5 million views. And just because of that post, their follower count went up, and they got like 6,000 or 7,000 additional followers because of that one post. But in my back of my head is like, great, 2.5 million people saw that post, but what did it actually do for the company? Other than put their logo in front of 2.5 million people who aren't necessarily in the market that they're in. So it's very interesting. So it kind of just, it's a weird conundrum, because A, you need a presence, but B, your presence, I think, could actually hurt you depending on what you're posting. And C, what does the vanity metrics actually equate to? So having your feedback as far as like having an objective, like we want to get a certain amount of people in seats for this conference. We want to get a certain amount of sales calls, and you can actually see those based off of a campaign. I think that's a really good approach to social posting in general. So,
yeah, no, I think it's funny too, just to kind of add on, Mike. I mean, obviously attribution is kind of the thing, right? But it is funny how it's taken so long, and will probably continue for some time, for people to look at social media marketing the same way they do other marketing, right? I mean, a lot of them won't think twice about running a newspaper ad, and maybe they can establish some kind of metric that they're going against, hopefully they're measuring. But, but there's so many channels that people wouldn't even think twice about. But I think one of the problems that sort of set the tone for social media marketing early was this strategy of bring in, the closest 16-year-old, who knows how to run Twitter, and let them run your social media platform. And that happened, in the early days, but there was a gold rush of sort of smoke and mirrors kinds of marketing experts who showed up and started, doing social media marketing for different companies with basically little or no real marketing knowledge. They just understood the platforms. And I think that trend is like sort of what's following us today. So in your work, Tony, how do you, I guess, get people over that hump? I mean, I think just like anything, right? I mean, if you told me, okay, we're going to have a metric and it's going to measure out and we're going to know, and I will be able to establish that this spend is worth something. Like, I mean, I guess anybody who's hiring a marketing firm could maybe wrap their head around that. But I think getting people to that initial conversation or, overcoming these bias has to be extremely challenging. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think we're very lucky. We do a lot of educating in the market, so we run a lot of free webinars on how you get results from social media. We put out a lot of content and a lot of reports. So generally, by the time we're actually talking to a potential client, they're already someone who has a pretty good understanding of what it takes to get results on social media. And so the number of conversations we'd have where people need persuading that that's the right way of going about doing things is actually pretty slim. But what I would say is we usually look at a 90-day window as being what's needed to start getting results. So whatever business you're in, you don't have to make a massive investment, and you don't have to commit a long, time window to be able to start seeing results from social media. But I would say the single biggest thing is take the advice of the specialists in your market. And there's two things I'd really highlight there, Ryan. One is social media is not all the same. All the platforms have their own quirks and their own things you've got to do differently to do well on them, and getting good results for one business is not the same as getting good results for another business. So we turn away a lot of business each month because when we talk to the particular businesses, they're not in the specialist areas that we really know how to get results for them. And if you think about taking on work, if you're a social media manager or you're an agency or you're a freelancer, it doesn't matter. If you go into a business and you've never worked for that type of business before, yes, you could do a credible job of their social media and you could make them look professional and slick, but you're going to spend the first 6-9 months just experimenting to find out what works for a business like this. If a pizza restaurant chain comes to us and says, could you get us more table bookings, more customers coming into our restaurants? We wouldn't know how to do that. And so we would spend the first 6 or 9 months just experimenting and trying to figure that out. Whereas if you hire into your business someone or an agency who's already done that before for that exact type of business, then it massively shortens the time horizons to start getting results, and therefore massively reduces the risk that this isn't going to pay off for you. And to come back to your point about entrusting a 16-year-old to run your company's social media, there are clearly, the younger generations are hugely switched on when it comes to social media, but there's a big difference between knowing how to use the platforms and being able to do some quirky things that get huge amounts of views versus really knowing how to get results for a particular type of business. And that's really what I would stress to any business owners or decision makers tuning in for this, is be really selective about who you employ or who you work with as an agency. Because if you choose someone or an agency or a business that has that track record, it's just going to massively accelerate you getting results, and therefore make it much more likely that social media becomes a long-term investment that pays off.
So let's play here. Like, say for example, I'm looking for a social media person to manage my clothing company or something to that widget A, widget B, whatever it is. What's your onboarding process like when you come to a new client? What kind of questions are you asking them? What kind of information do you need? And then obviously you have your fee for doing it, but do you need a minimum kind of ad campaign budget that you need to actually work with?
Yeah, great question. And for me, actually, those questions start before they've become a client.
Okay.
So we don't really want to work with a business unless before we've even started, we have a good idea that we can get great results for them. Because I'd rather say no and encourage them to go and find a different agency to work with if I can't see how we would get results for them. But in answer to your question, I mean, what I would particularly want to know when I'm talking to potential clients is what does their ideal customer look like? So who do they need to have meetings with or calls with or get onto a demo or get FaceTime with at a business breakfast? What's the demographics of those people? And actually, can they even articulate that? Because the more you can articulate that, the more it gives us a really clear audience to try and build for that business. And then the second thing we really like to understand is how they currently make sales or currently get results in their business. So is there something we can already plug social media into that we know is going to work? Because then it's very clear how that's going to contribute to business improvement. So to give you an example of that, if a business says to me, well, we historically have always won all our new business by getting decision makers from, I don't know, the pharmaceutical industry, along to a quarterly business breakfast we run. And, we know that for every 20 decision makers we get along to one of them turns into a consulting client, or one of them turns into a recruitment client, or one of them, engages us to do their IT consulting, or whatever it might be. If you can see that as an agency, then you can say, okay, well, we can plug directly into that, because then if I can use social media to generate a lot more attendees at your business breakfasts of the exact same kinds of people you've already got attending, then it's a no-brainer that that's going to turn into, ultimately more business for you. And for the potential client, it's also very clear to them, yes, this already works for us. And I can see that if you could, double the number of people we get along to those events, we're going to double the amount of business we get. It may not be in the first month. It may not even be in the sixth month, but I can see how that's going to flow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I kind of maybe want to take it back a little bit to, Mike alluded to budget and what people need to invest as part of this. And I understand it's a very general discussion. So we don't need to necessarily like pin down a number. But what I want to try and understand is I think that there's probably a subsect of people who think they're doing it right. Like Mike gave an example of, the credit union who's got their employees out dancing on TikTok or whatever. And, it's, I don't know if it's doing anything for them. Maybe it's ingratiating them to the public and that's, warming up an audience or something for them. I don't know. But it seems like somebody like that probably thinks they've already got a handle on what they're doing. So why do I need a firm? So if they're going to come to a firm, I suspect that there's a subsect of people who are thinking, okay, well, this is a inexpensive means of doing marketing, right? This is something I don't want to spend a lot of money on because look, we already got it. So for people who are, and maybe your clients are a little bigger than this, so maybe this isn't a problem, but for people in our audience who sort of small business owners or, really just trying to get started and they think social is a channel for them, I guess, first of all, how do we know we have a problem and we need help? And then second of all, I mean, how big of commitment could we expect? And you don't need to even get into dollars, but I mean, is this a giant request? Is this something that we can get into with a minimal budget? Is there sort of a minimum level of engagement that it just doesn't make sense? Like you're just throwing good money after bad marketing or, any of that stuff. So can you maybe flesh that idea out a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, a few points I'd make on that. The first one in terms of, what do you need to think about to know whether you have got a handle on this already? I would have two specific questions I would encourage people to ask themselves. Firstly, can you clearly identify and talk about the business wins that you have had in the last few months from social media? If you can say to me, yes, we've had 50 sales meetings and that's resulted in, X amount of new business for us, then it may well be that you're doing a good job of social media already. And the second question I would say is, if you suddenly had a collapse in the amount of business you've got and you needed to generate lots more interest and meetings and whatever quickly, do you know what you would do tomorrow to make that happen on social media? And again, if the answer is yes, then you're in a good place. If the answer is, well, I would try this or that or the other, but I wouldn't feel confident that that's going to bring me quick results, then probably you do need help. So those would be my sort of litmus tests, if you like. In terms of what's involved, I mean, our pricing's all on our site, Ryan, so I can be very transparent about that.
I actually like that, by the way, that you're very upfront about that, and it's printed right there. So props.
Well, so I mentioned I built and sold a previous internet business, and that was a job board business. So we were selling job advertisements for companies that wanted to make hires. And this was in the days of Monster and Simply Hired and those types of companies. And they would sell annual contracts, and you couldn't see on their website at all what their pricing really was. So every sale they made was a huge back and forth proposal and negotiations. And then in the market, everyone got wind of the fact that if you spoke to your sales rep in the last days of the month, they were desperate to hit target, and so you'd be able to get massive discounts on the deals that you've been talking about. And so there was just this huge amount of time got lost in needless back and forth conversations. So in that business, we were always very transparent. We had our pricing on the site. As soon as we got talking to anyone, we already knew they had that kind of budget. We were able to say categorically, no one gets a deal other than what's on the site. So that just closed off any time lost to negotiation. So that's a bit of a historical context, but that saved us so much time and made selling so much more productive for us that when I launched Social Hire, I just thought, right, we're going to follow exactly the same process here. It may lose me a few clients because there may be people who, had they talked to us, would have been persuaded that that would be a good sum of money to spend. But the flip side of that is, we don't lose time to people who don't have the budget, or indeed who are too big for us. I mean, there are corporate clients out there who are looking to spend tens and tens of thousands of dollars on an agency, and if they look at us, actually we're serving a smaller end of the market, and equally it's not productive to talk to them. But to come back to your question, Ryan, our top package, which is the most popular one, is $1,500 a month, and that's an all-in cost. And the only minimum commitment is to work with us for 3 months, so that we basically have a 90-day window to get that first wave of sales calls, meetings, event attendees, to happen. So it's a fraction of the cost of employing someone in a business, and beyond that is then just a monthly subscription, 2-week notice period. So it's look, as these things go, it's very low risk.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, because so much of, engaging with a partner in marketing, and especially if you really don't know anything about what you're doing, if you're totally naive to social media marketing and you're going to rely on an expert, there's like we talked about before, a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of people who claim to be one thing who aren't, and there's a lot of that. So making that decision is really difficult. So having your pricing just totally transparent like that, I think is a great strategy, especially for smaller businesses who might go, okay, I know what this is going to cost. It's not going to be this random, bill that I get for tens of thousands of dollars or something. And so I think that's a really smart approach.
So say, for example, I go and I sign up for that $1,500 package. Are you doing the ad buys out of that budget, or are you not doing any ad buys? Are you doing all organic, and unpaid for kind of traffic? Is that your MO? Is that kind of what you go for?
So most of our work is organic social media. So that's to say the results you can get on social media without pouring money into advertising. We do some very modest amounts of advertising for some clients. And where we do that is covered within that subscription. So if, for example, we started work with a business and let's say they didn't have a Twitter account, but we determined that actually Twitter would be a great place for them to reach the kind of decision makers they need to reach, well, then we might run some ad campaigns in the early days just to get that account, some initial followers and a bit of an audience built. But most of our work is organic, so it's what can we do on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, etc., that doesn't involve throwing lots of money at advertising.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that people struggle with too, especially if they're looking at this as a cost-effective approach, is the cost of hiring somebody to do things like write blogs and create content and things like that are it can be cost prohibitive or time consuming or whatever it is. I mean, is a big part of what you guys do creating all that stuff, and are you working like hand in glove with somebody, or is there sort of an advisor cap that you're offering to these people to sort of, I guess, steer what they're producing?
So we take on as a business everything that needs to be done to get results from social media. So if, for example, a client doesn't have any content of their own, and we figure out that them having some content of their own is going to be key to them getting results from social media, then we will ghostwrite some blogs or reports for them. But that's only if that's determined that that's what's needed. Similarly, if a client needs to run some webinars in order to get results and they aren't able to do that, we'll create the webinars and host them for them, and they just turn up and present or answer questions. But it very much dovetails with what the client's already doing. So some clients we start working with, they're already producing a blog every 2 weeks. And it's just really dispiriting for them because they're producing all this content and it's hardly getting seen at all. And obviously, at that point, we'll just tap into what they're already producing. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not a one size fits all approach. It's very much each business understanding who it is they want to reach, what assets they've already got, and therefore what plan of action we think makes most sense to achieve outcomes for that particular business. If you took 10 of our clients and you sort of looked at, okay, what are we doing for them to get results? It'd be 10 different sets of activities, often with, varying outcomes that they're looking to drive as well.
Okay. Well, one of the things I noticed, or I think is particularly interesting about you guys, is that, so you and correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, I believe that a lot of your focus is on sort of service industry, right? So it's consultants, it's recruiters, it's small businesses, it's people who are doing a service-based business, basically. Not to say that you wouldn't be capable of doing other things, but from what I could see on your website, it seems that thought work is a big part of what you guys market to. And in my mind, and I mean, I run a marketing agency. We don't specialize in social media, but it's always been challenging for me to do things, especially with small operations, where maybe there's an individual who is at the core of a business, or, is the lead consultant, or, who, sort of the driver for the company's business. It seems that it's very challenging to take that person and generate business in a way on, through social media channels, especially, that typically is done sort of by handshake and smile, right? So this is, especially like with consultants and stuff, these are people who go to meetings and networking events and they meet each other and stuff like that. So can you talk about any challenges specifically, that you guys have overcome, or ways that you've learned to manage working for service professionals, in social media? Like, how do we, is it about brand reputation? Is it a company development? I mean, are there anything in particular that's unique to service industries that you can talk about?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Our focus is B2B, and a lot of our clients are in professional services. My previous business was a job board for the management consulting sector. So my clients there were management consultancies, IT consultancies, and recruitment businesses. So obviously it then made a lot of sense that those kinds of businesses would be the ones that we'd be best placed to help when Social Hire was launched. I think the big mistake you see those kinds of businesses make, and therefore the kind of mindset shift you want to encourage, is they very often are focused on thought leadership. So if we can produce a report that shows that we are the experts in, whatever it might be, and then we can push that out and get it seen by as many of the right people as possible, then the phone is going to start ringing loads, and we're going to get loads of business. That tends to be the mindset of B2B professional services companies. And actually, we would flip that on its head, and we would say, what do you need to win more business in the type of business you run? And generally, the answer is more conversations and more meetings with the kinds of business decision makers that ultimately, we would do consulting work for. And so if you take everything they do and you flip it on its head and you say, okay, how can we take what you're doing and turn that into something that generates conversations, then you do everything totally differently. So if I give you an example there, if a consulting firm is going to write a thought leadership report on whatever sector they serve, well, why don't you reach out to decision makers in those types of companies and look to interview them and get their insights to produce the next thought leadership report that you're going to produce? And that way, instead of producing a report and hoping it gets seen by the right people, you flip that on its head and now said, right, we're going to have 50 Zoom meetings with our ideal clients to get their input on all the challenges there are in this market right now. And therefore you've opened the door and you've started conversations with 50 potential clients, rather than hoping that publishing the report is going to produce those kinds of meetings.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Does that make sense?
Well, it's an interesting point. It almost is like, what I'm thinking of is almost like the Simon Sinek start with why thing, right? I think the impulse, especially of small business people, is that I have a solution for your problem. Let me tell you about that solution. Here's your thing, right? And I've got the answer for you. And really what you need to do is stop and let them tell you their problem. And
absolutely.
So in the case of what you're describing, it's a little bit that, right? It's, how could I as a consultant try to pretend to know what your needs are without having spoken to you first? And I think there's I don't know if it's an arrogance or an egocentrism or something. It seems like human nature to sort of lead with I have a solution to your problem, instead of you have a problem, tell me about it, and then let's talk about a solution. So I think that's an interesting insight.
And it's almost about adapting to the existence of social media, because if you think of those types of businesses historically, we go and present at a conference where we are the invited expert speaker on whatever topic it might be, and we present to a whole auditorium of decision makers from our industry. And then after having given that presentation, we get loads of business cards, and then that turns into some meetings and some follow-ons afterwards. That's the way, if you go back 20 years, that those kinds of businesses would operate. And so they're thinking about social media in the same way. Could we, create a video of ourselves talking about this topic and get it seen by loads of the right people so that they then, contact us? Whereas actually where social media is more powerful is if you use it to open the door in the first place and get those conversations, independently of how much your content is actually being seen.
So as someone who's hosted a podcast now for 5 years, I do it myself. I'll go after people that I want to talk to, invite them on the show, and use that to open the door to work down the road, just have that contact, whatever. And having the ability to just reach out and have a credible podcast and say, hey, you want to come on our show? We'd love to talk about whatever you're doing. It kind of reverses the approach, instead of cold calling and saying, hey, I need a job, or hey, I'm looking for this. Have them on as an experienced guest, as an expert, and you A, develop the relationship, B, you have the content to share, and your approach is coming from someone as, I'm in the same field here. Let's discuss this topic, and it actually is a really unique vehicle to be able to do stuff like that. So.
It seems like, and I think it's the same in sales or anything, right? It's value creation, right? We need to give you a reason to have a conversation with me. And I think, back to Mike's example for the 40th time of the, dancing credit union person, like, I don't know who that serves, like, I mean, it's not really offering value, maybe I'll laugh or something, but like, I don't know. I mean, do I want my bank to be the one that I laugh at? Like, I'm not sure I want to stick my money in the bank that I think is really funny. And so, so it's interesting that the way so many people approach it is not this, right? They're not, creating content for a problem they think exists, rather than sort of, I guess, inviting people to tell them what the problem is.
And the way I would really encourage people to think about this, and it's sort of an example I like to share with people, is would you as your business rather stand up in the stadium where the Super Bowl is going to take place and have 10 minutes to talk to everyone in the audience about what it is your business does? And that's just, loads of random members of the public, all sorts of ages, demographics, whatever, all sorts of different businesses they work in. Or would you rather go and speak at a business breakfast where there's only 100 people in the room, but they
all
are
qualified,
all the exact types of decision makers that your business typically sells to? Well, I would say in that scenario, most business owners, certainly of niche businesses, would say, I'd much rather have that audience of 100 of my ideal clients than hope that somewhere in the stadium someone is listening who's actually a good potential client for us. And if you take that analogy and then you port that to social media, well, the equivalent is to say, okay, our business doesn't need to be seen by the whole world to be successful. We just need to be seen by this type of decision maker, and we need that to turn into conversations and meetings with those kinds of people. And if that means that most people in the world have never heard of our business, actually that doesn't matter. So long as the right people have, and that opens the door with the right people, then that's where success comes from.
Yeah. Can you talk about how you filter out the people who don't necessarily match the criteria? So when you're trying to contact people, I mean, starting from scratch, how do you go about and say, I need to find 1,000 people that all do this job? Are you looking on LinkedIn and you're trying to, okay, I need a CEO that's in this field that does this, and you're trying to filter out that criteria and then you direct message those people? Or is there another approach that, instead of the more manual approach of actually doing it physically, is there like tools that you use?
Yeah, so it could be LinkedIn and you're searching for, particular job titles and certain companies you want to target. It could be you're targeting Facebook groups that already exist for particular, niche audiences. In some cases, it could be that building that audience on Twitter is the right approach. But I mean, what we focus on, and what I would encourage any small business owner to focus on, really are three things. One is growing your audience of the right people. So whatever social media platform you're going to be on, figure out, how am I going to grow quarter on quarter the number of decision makers who are our ideal clients, that our message is going to reach. Secondly, then, how are you going to build trust with those people? Because let's say I get 100 new connections on LinkedIn and they're all our ideal clients, but those people don't know me. They've never seen me talk about anything. They don't know what I'm expert in. If I suddenly try and get a call with them, or I look to invite them along to an event we're running or something like that, they don't know me. They don't believe I'm an expert in anything, and so the trust isn't there. You're trying to make a sale too quickly, basically. So the second thing you need to do alongside growing the audience is then build trust. So you need to be posting things and engaging in conversations in your niche market that make other people perceive you as a real expert at what you do. And then the third thing is converting. Don't post and engage and hope that that's going to make the phone start ringing. Actually figure out, what am I going to do that's going to turn this audience into people who've said, yes, I'd like to come along to your next business breakfast, or yes, I'd love to be your next podcast guest. And if you can get those three things right, then actually with a relatively small audience on social media, that can then produce a pretty consistent flow of, Zoom calls, meetings, business breakfast attendees, whatever it might be.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that maybe an ideal candidate, and maybe you'll be open to other people too, but maybe an ideal candidate would be somebody that could sort of articulate who it is they want to try and reach or knows their target audience. And the fact that you mentioned that not everybody can articulate it very well leads me to think that, you probably come across a lot of small business owners who don't really know who they serve. They've created a widget or they've created a consultancy based on their experience, but they don't really know their customer, so to speak. Can you say, or, we talk about, I guess, what part of your business is a little bit consultative in that, if somebody is having trouble articulating that person, can you help them? Or are they just sort of cast out to go figure it out on their own? And when they get back from their spirit quest, they can hire
you. More often than not, businesses we're talking to will know who their ideal audience is already, or with some prodding questions, some probing questions from us, they'll be able to, get to the point where they can articulate that. They may not always have thought it through in advance of talking to us, but once we start asking them, if you think of your last 10 sales you've made, how did those sales come about? Who were the decision makers that you needed to talk to for that to happen? If we could get you another 50 meetings with people like that, would you be confident that would turn into more business for you? And obviously, depending on the answers that come back, you either help them really refine down to who they need to be talking to, or you've thrown up the fact that they simply don't know, and it's been a bit haphazard and potluck up until this point. But there are also, to make the distinction, there are businesses where who they want to go after, it's much harder to target on social media. If you sell a technology platform that helps salespeople be better at their job as a salesperson, or you're a sales training company and you help salespeople get better at selling, well, clearly, if you are having enough conversations with sales directors, VPs of sales, your sales decision makers, it's only a matter of time before you're going to be talking to one of them who's got a real problem at the moment that they need to, bring in an external tool or some external training to ramp up the sales results they're getting. Whereas there's other types of businesses where you don't have that same certainty, that same confidence. So I'll give you a classic example at the moment. We see loads of businesses approaching business owners who help you secure office space. And they are, helping companies that have got office space to rent out that office space to small businesses. But the problem is you can't readily see on social media which businesses are remote and which businesses do actually have an office. And so that is a really unproductive use of social media, because you could contact 100 entrepreneurs and every single one of them might be running a remote business. So not a single one of them is a potential client for you trying to sell office space.
Yeah,
do you see the distinction I make there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I guess I'm trying to think too. I mean, what about the person who comes to you, the green consultant that, has a general business management experience, for example, but could really speak to a lot of topics? Do you help them niche down and choose a directive? So in your example, you guys sort of, okay, well, this is a bad use of social media, so there must be good use, so let's look at a different audience. Is that part of the discussion too? Is, maybe you serve 10 different verticals really well, but just for like an efficiency standpoint, we need to narrow it down to one or two. Is that sort of some of the decision-making process that happens in an engagement with you?
Absolutely right. Yes. And there's a couple of different things there. The first is how good is your conversion? So you may have 10 different service lines that your business offers, but once you drill down into it, perhaps one of those is one where, for every 2 or 3 prospects you talk to, you end up closing a piece of business because you're really good at selling that particular service line, or the track record that you've got and the client testimonials and the case examples you can give mean you're really convincing and are able to sell that particular service line. Whereas when you talk through some of the other service lines, they're things that they've done some of, or that they have aspirations of getting into, but it's going to be a lot less fruitful to try and help them ramp up that part of the business. And that comes back to what I talked about early on about plugging into an existing sales process that we know works. So if I've got a business comes to us and says, we do this thing already, and we'd really love to get into this thing as well, then I would always say, right, well, let's start off having your social media ramp up the results you're getting from what you already are good at, because then you can prove the impact of social media quickly. And then if further on down the line they want to extend it into the new thing they want to get into, then great. But yeah, so that would be one key distinction. And yeah, just the track record that people have in certain things, as a professional services business or a B2B business, it's every other call you have, someone's going to say, can you talk me through an example of having worked with a business like ours before, or having got results for a business like the kind of results we want to get. And if you have broadened out too much and you're trying to do too many different things, then yeah, your success is just going to be really stifled.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One thing I wanted to get into, and we sort of touched on this a little bit with how service professionals can maybe position their language or approach conversation on social media. But I wondered if you had any other like sort of social selling hacks that people might be able to employ if they're, let's say, a small business, maybe they're not totally ready to engage a company like yours or any agency for that matter. They're just doing it on their own. And they're really trying to figure out how to maximize their time or do well on it, and maybe in preparation for bringing somebody on down the road. How do we, are there tips, or are there things that we could be doing, or maybe more specifically not doing, that are causing harm or actually setting us up for failure versus, a slow build to the point where we could maybe engage with somebody like you?
There was a really interesting survey of social media managers done just before Christmas about how many hours a week do you need to do a good job on a social media platform. And the answer was about 20 hours a week per platform that a business wants to have a good presence on. I draw attention to that because you could really lose a lot of time and get very little in the way of results if you're not devoting enough resource to social media. Because if you're going to need that kind of amount of time to do a really good job on a platform, clearly if you're only able to put in, a couple of hours a week to this, you're just setting yourself up for failure from the word go. I think, but to answer your question about quick wins and hacks, what is interesting is to see businesses that already have quite an audience on social media, but they just haven't figured out how to get better results from it. So quite often we'll talk to a business where if you take the key decision makers in the business and you look at, for example, their LinkedIn networks, or in some instances their existing Twitter accounts, they may already have a lot of the right people connected to them. And, so for them, it's just figuring out how do you make conversion work? And that's where you can get a really quick win with social media, is if that audience is already built and they just haven't been able to figure out how to turn that into results. And the biggest advice I could give there is focus on making your conversion conversational and thinking about what's in it for the other person rather than what you want to sell to them. And to come to Mike's example earlier of doing podcasts, I can give you a really great example of that. When the pandemic struck, we thought as a business, right, what can we do that would really help small businesses right now? Would keep us front of mind with people, but wouldn't be selling at a time when people have just got bigger problems that they're facing right now. And we said, well, why don't we? A lot of our network are small business owners, consulting firm owners, recruitment business owners. They could all give great advice that would help people right now in the situation they're in. So we set out and we use social media to approach these people and say, look, we're going to do a series of video interviews, just short, 5-10 minute videos for you to be visible in your market and share some great advice with people to help them right now. And that turned into our single biggest source of new clients.
Love it.
But because every call I had with those people, we'd press stop on the recording and then they want to carry on talking to us and finding out more about what our business does and how could we help them right now. But if I'd approached those same people and said, hey, the pandemic struck, you really probably ought to do something about your social media. Why don't we jump on a call and see how Social Hire could help you? If I'd taken that approach, I would have barely got a call the whole of that time. Whereas as it was, every day I was having fresh calls with small business owners. And then it's just a numbers game. For every 5 of those you have, one of them turns into a client.
Which is great. Yeah. Hey, Tony, we're getting to that time. Do you want to tell us where people can reach out and get in touch with you?
That's very kind. So the website is Social Hire. There's a hyphen between social and hire, but if you just search up Social Hire on Google, we'll be top of the page there. On the homepage, you'll find a book a call button. So if you want to have an exploratory chat with us, you're very welcome to do that. Or equally, look me up on LinkedIn. You won't be surprised to hear I have a decent presence there and very open to connecting with people and having chats there as well.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Tony, for doing this. I mean, I think that this is a huge topic, and I think your approach is really smart. This idea of sort of, niching into it instead of chasing the vanity metrics and everything else. So I really appreciate you taking the time and kind of breaking it down, especially here at like the kickoff of the first week of 2023. I think that this will be really great for a lot of people in our audience and, maybe help advise them going forward. So thanks so much for taking the time. It's
been an absolute pleasure. And anyone listening who'd like to have a further chat, I'd be delighted to do that.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much then to Mike and Tony and everybody else who listens to the show this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.